وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. It's very nice to have you here and to have this opportunity to give this lecture at my dear masjid, the Wellness Center. Subhanallah, I give these lectures, these types of lectures all across the country, and I've never given it here. And I usually don't like to give it here just because it's not work for me. This is my home. But Sheikh Adnan twisted my arm and I said, Hadir, I will give it inshallah. So it's really nice to be able to share some of this material with you. My biggest, I guess, obstacle or biggest challenge, I should say, as I was telling the brothers, is to try to keep this into about an hour, because I don't want you here till 4 o'clock in the morning, and we could easily go till 4 o'clock because there's so much to cover. This is a topic that I'm going to barely skim the surface on. I don't want you to feel that you need to hear everything all at once. If there is interest, we'll do more of these specifically on this topic in the future, but I'll do my best to give you something that's actionable, where you can walk away and, yeah, if you could make sure that's taken care of. You can walk away with something that you can put to use, inshallah. طيب, so we'll be talking about Islamic finance and introduction, and I'm going to skip my bio. And basically what I'd like to talk about is 5 things. I'll begin by setting the stage of Islam and finance and trying to explain why do we have something called Islamic finance to begin with. Why is this a special deal? We'll also then deal with the 2 parts, the financing part and the investment part. That'll make sense when I get into the discussion. I will then leave you with some resources and we'll open it up for Q&A. I personally don't mind taking as many questions as you guys have. I don't mind staying late. I don't live too far from here. I don't have to get on a flight and go home, so I can take all the questions you have. I would just ask that if you keep them till the end, that way the flow can be continuous, inshallah, and we don't get disrupted. So I do want to begin by this slide, and I usually have this slide mainly for me, and to set me in the right mindset before I give these lectures. And that is to understand that anything and everything that we do has to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything that we do that disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is useless. It may be useful in this dunya, it may lead to some profit, it may lead to some popularity or some connections or transactions or business dealings, but with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala it's useless. So I put this sign mainly for me to say, what is my intention of me being here with you today? And I also pose the question to you, why are you here today? Maybe you had nothing to do, you came, you prayed Asha, and they said, oh, there's a lecture happening, let me sit and listen. Maybe you came to meet somebody. Maybe you came because your parents forced you to come. It doesn't matter why you came. You get a moment right now to reset that intention and to say, Ya Allah, I'm here to learn something about your deen so I can draw closer to you. And if you do have that intention, what happens is for the next hour that we have together, that you could be getting as much ajr as if you were sitting in the background, in the corner, reading Quran or studying a book of fiqh or doing something that is quote unquote worship related. Am I saying that listening to me and reading the Quran is the same ajr? Of course not. But what I'm saying is it sets you in the right mindset that, Ya Rab, I want to get closer to you. Whether it's studying fiqh or reading or making tasbih, it's all with the intention of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly our time together can be that if you reset that intention. So I welcome you to take a moment and just in your heart reset it and make sure that it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب, before we begin, actually before I ask you questions, I love to pick on people. So if you don't want to be picked, don't make eye contact, because if you do make eye contact, I'm going to pick on you. But I do want to quickly survey the audience and find out from you, I really want to see hands up. Why are you here? Just shout it out. There is no wrong answer. What is it that you want to get out of this lecture? Because when I hear from you, I can make sure I incorporate it into my talk. So any brave souls that want to put their hand up and tell me what they hope to get out of this session before I start picking on people. Yes, sir.
To know halal or haram.
To know halal or haram. Okay. Anybody else? No wrong answer. Tfaddal.
Available financing resources for Muslims.
Perfect. Available options that you can walk away with. Yes, sir.
How to invest money.
How to invest money in the halal. Sisters, anything you want to get out of this conversation to make sure that I hit it. Yes, Mahmoud.
Understand what is the meaning of Islamic finance and having an overview of Islamic finance and investments.
Perfect. What is Islamic finance definition and what is investments? What are the options available? Anything else before we kick off? Yes, Abdul Rahman, and we have you as well. Sorry. Fadal, Abdul Rahman. How to make wealth so I can spend it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remind me your name. You told me and I forgot. Forgive me. Simak. Yes. Wa alaikum salam.
Primarily just want to see what are out of all the available options, what's the best, and then how to avoid getting into unwanted stuff.
Perfect. So what are the options? What are the best? What's safe? I'll inshallah deal with all of that. Anything burning before we begin? Anything else? Yes, Rizwan. Last word.
How far is the Canadian government in accepting and adopting Islamic finance?
Okay, perfect. So we'll address all of that inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Let me start by quizzing you. Now I'm going to quiz you on what is Islam. Now you may say this is such a basic question. Come on, we all Muslim here. I assume we're all Muslim, or at least we know what Islam is. So I'm going to set the stage and say, imagine that I just came down from the sky, from a different planet, and I land here and I come to you and I say, you nice Muslims, you're always smiling and you're very well dressed and your women wear these things on your head. Can you please tell me what Islam is? What would you answer? Again, not a trick question. What would you say Islam is? How would you define Islam to somebody, to a non-Muslim? Yes, sir. So basically Tawheed, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, that you are free from associating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that you follow what He asks us to do. Very good. Any other ways of describing Islam to somebody who doesn't know much about it? Nawab. Justice, fairness. Anybody else? Not a trick question, guys. We're all Muslims, so we kind of should know this.
Maybe simplify it to like a way of life.
A way of life. Beautiful. Anything else? Halal and haram. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Total submission to the will of God. Jazakumullah khair. Anybody else? Last one. Sisters. How would you define Islam to somebody else? No takers. Going once. Going twice. All of that is correct. Everything that you guys said is correct. I love a slightly different variation of what you guys said, and that is wholehearted self-giving. Islam is wholehearted self-giving. What does that mean? That you give yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fully, wholeheartedly, lovingly, willingly. Why do I tell you this? We're here to talk about Islamic finance and money. Because if we don't get this point, if we don't understand the framework that we're going to work within, nothing really makes sense. Well, why is it this way? And why is interest problematic? And we always have these questions. Well, why is making money by selling okay, but by debt is not okay? It's because when we approach Islam, we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as our creator, knows us so much so that He knows what will be better for us, even if in the short term it may not seem like it. We all have masaib that take place. What's happening in Gaza right now is a huge musibah. And we don't want it and we don't wish it. And that's understandable and that's good. But there's good in it. We can't tell, we can't see, but there is good in it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us. So Islam is when you give yourself to Allah, you submit. That, as the sister said, you say, Ya Rabb, I come to you and you tell me what you want and I follow through. And the word abd is interesting. In Arabic, abd comes from the sense that you don't own anything. You're a slave doesn't own anything. They don't own the clothes on their back. They don't own the meal that they're about to ingest. They don't own the opinion that they have. Nobody comes to a slave and says, what's your opinion on XYZ? They have no opinion. Their master's opinion is their opinion. And that is the relationship we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The true relationship is where we submit lovingly to the most merciful who wants nothing for you except what is best for you. That's the framework we're going to work within, inshallah. طيب. So Islam, wholehearted self-giving, as you know, it covers all aspects of your life. It is not just your diet and your dress and your spiritual relationship with your Creator. It's all your transactions, and financial transactions are just an extension of that. Now, as Muslims, we have social and ethical responsibilities, and this is the crux of why we have Islamic finance. Socially and ethically, there's dictation on you as a Muslim. The next slide will explain that a bit further, and that's precisely why we have something called Islamic finance. From a terminology perspective, when we say Islamic finance, halal, Sharia compliant, it all means the same thing. Sometimes it's going to be used interchangeably by me, but it means what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So let's get into the details. So Islamic finance really is all about what you cannot do. Everything in general is allowed. And this is, by the way, not in Islamic finance specifically. In fiqh, everything is halal by default, except that which is haram. So we're not trying to go and create something special that is Sharia compliant. Every contract that you can think of is halal, unless it has something that makes it not halal. All food is halal, except that which Allah said is not halal. All drink is halal, except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said is not halal. So keep that in mind as we go through the few definitions that I have for you. So when we have a credit agreement, think about it as finance. When we say finance, the big term, is split into two parts. There's the credit side and the investment side. Why do we have two sides? It's because capital is either something you have and you don't need it, or something that you don't have and you do need it. So let's say I'm going to go create a business and I really need $1 million to create this nice mechanic shop and start fixing cars, but I don't have $1 million. I go and get a credit contract where I get somebody to give me money somehow so I can operate my business. The investment contracts are completely opposite, where I have $1 million, let's say, and I don't need it. I don't need to consume it. I don't need to give it to my children. What am I going to do with it? I look for a way by which I can deploy it and get a return on it. So that's why we have finance and investments. On a credit side, which is finance, basically there's two things that you want to keep in mind: riba and gharar. Anything that is involved in riba on a credit contract is haram, period. We can talk philosophically why. Happy to do that. If I had 6 hours, I'd do that with you. And seriously, if you want to know the philosophy behind it, ask me afterwards. But we don't have time to go through it today. But riba, anytime there's a return on a credit contract, it would be completely haram. And the other thing is gharar. Gharar is that fancy word for basically deceptive uncertainty, unreasonable uncertainty, excessive uncertainty. Why do we use those terms? Because actually investment has uncertainty in it. If I'm going to take money and open up this pizza shop, I don't know if I'm going to make good pizza, if it's going to sell, if people will eat it. So there is uncertainty always. Uncertainty is fine, especially if it's a productive asset underneath. But when it's unreasonable, that's when it becomes gharar. So gambling, for example, is very, very extremely problematic because of the uncertainty involved in it. It's unreasonable uncertainty. From an investment perspective, so that's the credit side. From an investment perspective, you basically have to ask yourself the two questions. Is this investment that I'm going to do, is it socially acceptable? And what do we mean by that? alcohol, tobacco, gambling, these areas of the world, of society, that's very vice. It's vice-based. And by the way, even non-Muslims understand it as such. When something is very addictive, it's quite problematic. So in Islam, it's completely haram, and you don't need me to tell you that. You all know this by now. And the other thing is ethical aspects. Interest is actually seen as unethical in Islam. There's a reason why. It's seen as problematic because of the ethics behind it. And it's not problematic for Muslims, it's problematic for humanity. Just like alcohol and tobacco and gambling is going to destroy Muslims and non-Muslims, interest will destroy everybody. Give it enough time and give it enough space, and that's exactly what will happen. And we talked about the last principle, that in Islam everything is allowed except that which is not allowed. So you look in a credit contract, if it doesn't have riba or gharar, typically it would be okay. If you look at an investment and the social and ethical impacts are met, typically it would be okay. That's the philosophy behind it. I'm going to get into a bit more detail next. Can somebody tell me, well, actually before I ask you this, I'll explain what interest is. Riba in Islam is interest. Riba is basically, there's two types of riba. The first one I'm going to spend 30 seconds on because it doesn't really apply to most of us. It's riba where we exchange unequal qualities. And the other one that we're all involved in, unfortunately, is the exchange of unequal quantities. Explain the two. So qualities. So let's say I go to Muhammad and say, Muhammad, I really like sukkari dates, which I do. And let's say he has sag'i dates, which I don't know if he does, but let's say he likes them. And sukkari dates is, we'll call it grade A dates, like really good dates. And sag'i dates are grade B dates. So he has the sukkari that I want. I have a whole bunch of sag'i. So I say, listen, I'll give you 2 pounds of sag'i dates for 1 pound of sukkari dates. That would be considered riba in Islam. You're not allowed to do that. Now, why don't I spend time on this? Because who does this? Nobody does this. You actually, what you would do, what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told his Sahaba to do, is to take their sag'i date, sell it in the open market, get money, then go buy the sukkari dates. And that's what we call in our industry mark to market. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam talked about it 1500 years ago. The interest that we're all involved in is when the exchange is unequal quantities. The quality is the same, $1 is $1, but the quantity of exchange is different. That's when I go and exchange $100 for $115, for example. I go to Mahmoud and say, Mahmoud, I need $10,000. And he says, no problem. Here's $10,000. Give me back $11,000 in a year from now. That would be unequal quantities, although the underlying is exactly the same. $1 is $1. That would be considered riba in Islam. And I think that's not debated amongst many people. And the Jumhur would qualify any excess on lending to be riba, period. Now, it's important to keep in mind that if Mahmoud says, Khaled, here's $10,000, and you must give me 10,000 plus your Garmin watch, the Garmin watch is riba. Riba is not necessarily money. It's any excess. So whatever he asked for above and beyond what he lent me is going to be considered, if it's stipulated by him, then it would be considered riba. Let me give you this example. If he says, Khaled, here you go, $10,000, you need that to pay for a new car, no problem, give me back $10,000, 10 in a year from now. And I choose in a year from now to give him 10,000 and my Garmin watch. Would the Garmin watch be riba? Yes, no. What is it? No. Why no? That's it. It would be called, in this case, hiba, because I chose to gift it to him. It wasn't stipulated by Mahmoud day one. So the trick behind riba is A, it has to be a lending contract. B, you have to stipulate an excess. If these two things come together, it's very problematic. طيب, where does interest come from? Has anybody given that some thought? Why do we have interest rates? Why do we have 10%, 15%, 3%, the Bank of Canada rate, mortgage rates? Why do we have interest rates? What are the components of riba? Anybody want to take a stab? Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So inflation, absolutely you're right. Inflation is a source of riba. We'll talk about inflation in a second, but what are the other two sources? There's three in total. Yes, sir. Aman. Fractional reserve banking, no. That's basically when you put money in a bank and they choose to lend a bit of it away because they know not everybody's going to come and get it. That's actually not a component of riba. That's how the system works. And in a non-riba way or economic system, it can still operate this way. So two more reasons.
Time value of money.
Correct, time value of money. What that is when Mahmoud lends me the $10,000, I bought the car. He could have bought the car himself, but he's taking the bus for the next year. He's eventually going to buy the car a year from now. So for a whole year, he's taking the bus in the cold. So the car is going to be less valuable for him a year from now. Had he had the money to buy it today, not lend me, he would have had that additional benefit. So yes, one is inflation, two, time value of money, and three is? Opportunity cost is time value of money, so very close attached to that. There's a third reason, Rizwan. Risk. Excellent. You guys are good, mashallah. Usually the crowd doesn't give me all three, but you guys have said it perfectly. One is inflation. Inflation means Hussam lends me money. He says, Khaled, here's $10,000. I'm going to get $10,000 back. But in a year from now, or two or three or four, he can buy less stuff with the same $10,000 because inflation ensures that prices go up. A cup of coffee used to be $1, now it's $1.50. Same cup of coffee. So he inflates the interest rates to ensure that he can be compensated for it. Second reason is risk. Rizwan is going to lend to everybody in this room $10,000. What's the likelihood that every single person in this room will pay him back? Well, you guys are Muslim and you honor your contracts, and most of us would want to pay him back, but maybe some of the businesses that you've done failed. So what he does is he charges everybody an additional $1,000. So he says, I'll give you 1,000, give me back, or I'll give you 10, give me back 11. And that way he accounts for the 4 or 5 of us that never pay him back. And the third reason is time value of money. I'd rather have money today rather than 10 years from now. All of that is correct. Which of that can you get compensated for? Currently, and scholars are debating this, but currently none of it you can be compensated for it. So certainly not the time value of money. That's recognized in Islam and by scholars. Scholars have talked about this, and that is unallowed. You're not allowed to be compensated for the time value of money. Risk, again, is not allowed to, and that's not debated. This is that's why in Islam, when you do a qard, what do we call it? The only way you can do a qard in Islam is qard what? Hasan. Hasan means I recognize that I'm taking all the risk and I'm not getting any return. And the return is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So technically in Islam, there is no reason for commercial lending. There's absolutely, that would never be a thing in an Islamic economy. Nobody would go out, you wouldn't have a bank that would lend money because there's no benefit for it to lend money. Why would it lend you money? Why would I lend anybody money? If my family and my brother and my mom need money, fine. But if it's a stranger that comes to me, I have all the risk of not getting paid back and no return. So it's only for charity that it's usually done. And inflation, that's where scholars are debating. Should we compensate people for inflation or not? It's a very touchy subject because inflation is something you know after the fact, not pre. So when Mahmoud comes and he can't really says, Khaled, here's 10, give me back 11, because he doesn't know, will it be 1,000 extra, will it be 500, will it be 300? So again, you stay away from inflation, but what you would do if you're going to lend for a long time, don't lend cash. What I would do is say, Mahmoud, lend me the equivalent of 1 bar of gold, for example. Oh, it happens to be $10,000 today. Perfect. 10 years from now, I'll pay him back the equivalent of 1 bar of gold, which happens to be $12,000. That could be a way by which you can fight off inflation. طيب, interest equals riba. This is also something that some of our Muslim communities a little bit confused upon. And I only realized this as I started to talk across the country, and I was amazed at how many people really genuinely don't know this, so I thought I'd put it up on a slide. I know there's one opinion in Egypt, and it's not an opinion of the Azhar, it's an opinion of the previous Sheikh of the Azhar that says, you know, the interest rates in the bank is not really interest, it's a fa'idah, it's a good thing. But no, Jumhur al-Islam, the majority of scholars, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority in Islam say anything that you get excess on lending is completely haram. Whether it's 10%, 5%, 1%, 0.05%, it doesn't matter. My Garmin watch, a bouquet of flower, anything that you get excess, كل أيما قرض جلب منفعة is the term that our scholars use. Any lending contract that brings about benefit would be considered riba. Some people say, well, it's a portion of the profit of the bank. If I put money in the bank, they take it, they invest it, and they give me a portion back from the profit. No, that's not what happens. Sorry, I work for one, and that's not what happens. Yes, you put money in the bank, and they're going to go and do something with it, but you're not getting a portion of the profit. You're getting a stipulated return, irrespective of what the underlying does. And the second thing is, sometimes people say fixed versus variable. If it's a fixed interest rate, it's a problem. If it's a variable interest rate, it's not a problem because it changes. Not at all. Again, think of it very simply. If I'm lending money or I'm borrowing money and I'm returning anything excess to what was borrowed, that would be considered riba. That's the only teaching that I'm going to do now. I'm going to get into the details, but hopefully that made sense. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them at near the end of the talk, inshallah. طيب. This is another interesting thing that I think is important for us to think about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made certain things haram. And in our understanding, whether it's tobacco, interest rates, alcohol, gambling, pork, Allah didn't make this haram to test you. It's not like these things are amazing, and you know, when you drink alcohol, it's going to extend your life and you're going to feel amazing. And when you go and gamble, it gives you a nice buzz. But for Muslims, I want to see if they adhere to the rules, and I'm going to make it haram for them. That's not our understanding in Islam. And by the way, Allah could have done it that way. This could have been tayyib, and He made it haram. He could have. Who am I to say, oh, that's not fair, Ya Allah? Allah said He made halal, He made tayyib halal, and He made the khabith haram. He basically said, anything that will kill you, will destroy you emotionally, physically, intellectually, is banned. You're not allowed to do it. Not only that, look at the love, look at the mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for you. He creates you, and He creates that which will destroy you. And then He says, please don't do this. You don't need to go figure out what will destroy you. He told you what will destroy you, and He said, if you don't do it, guess what? It's going to destroy you if you do it. So you're not paying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to do it. He's going to pay you. He's going to give you hasanat for not doing the thing that will destroy you. Tell me there's more mercy in anything that is more merciful than that. And He made what is good for you halal, and you get ajr for it. This concept, the more you understand about the deen, the more you realize I need to run back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in full force, because nobody will love me the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me. It's unfortunately only because we don't understand our deen correctly, or it wasn't taught to us correctly. We were taught this deen don't and do and haram and hellfire and I get it. I was born in the same, raised up in the same way, but that wasn't the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So our ummah needs to do that U-turn and get back to how he sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to teach it, which is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for it to be taught. So I put that out there again just to set the framework for us, inshallah. Right, let's get into the detail. Sharia compliant financing options. So I'll talk to you about financing options that are halal in Canada. I'll talk to you about investment options that are halal in Canada. Then I'll give you some resources and then I'll send you home. Capiche? Does that sound good? Excellent. Right. When it comes to Islamic finance, so the credit side, remember, return on lending versus return on investments. People say, can I go and invest and make money? Of course. Can I go and lend and make money? Of course not. Why? That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set the system. I can actually tell you why. And if we have time, maybe I'll just allude to it. But I want you to take it to understand that you can never, as I said many times before, make any sort of return on a credit contract. So what is Islamic finance then? If this is the case, if it's haram to make any return on a lending contract, all of Islamic finance and all the other people and cheap suits that will stand in front of you and talk about Islamic finance, all they're trying to do is restructure contracts. They take a debt-based contract, restructure it into an investment contract. Because some people say, oh, you guys are just taking the haram, giving Arabic names to it, and now all of a sudden it's halal. Some people do that. I recognize that. And it's very problematic and it's painful and I want to vomit every time I see it. And it's very bad. And I apologize on behalf of the entire industry for the bad apples that actually do that. There are people that take advantage of you and the fact that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and really take the haram, just call it murabaha, musharaka and sell it to you. I get that. But insha'Allah, the majority of the industry is not trying to do that. What they're trying to do is to take a debt contract and change it into an investment contract. And by doing so, it becomes halal. Now, this is where some people will say it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're taking the haram, restructuring it into the halal, but ultimately it's the same thing. Yes and no. And more no than yes. What do I mean by that? Like in Islam, I just actually came from a wedding just before here. I was, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Tawakkul, may Allah bless him, we all know him and love him. His daughter was getting married today. How was that contract done? Well, it was him, his son-in-law, there was a contract. He said, I offer you my daughter to get married. He accepted, there was dowry, there were witnesses, there was ishar, we all found out. Boom, that's all the needed elements of a contract to be halal. Agreed? That was a halal marriage because all the fundamental needs were taken care of. Imagine, same day, in a different hall, two people, like a man and a woman were there, her parents were there, the witnesses were there, and then they do everything, but the dowry was missing. No dowry. But they get married, they have the lunch, the dinner, what have you, and then Sheikh Tawakkul's daughter and his son-in-law and these two people, fast forward 20 years from now, they kind of look the same. These two people had 4 kids, those two people had 4 kids. Those two people have a house with a pool, those two people have a house with a pool. Those two people have a dog and a really nice job and RSPs. Those people have a nice dog and RSP. You can tell where I'm going with this. They kind of look the same. Like fast forward, they all look the same. These families are almost non-distinguishable. But in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are they the same?
No.
Why? Why? Exactly. One of the fundamental elements is missing. Makes it haram. Just like halal meat. Halal meat could be, all it's needed is one small thing. To make halal meat halal, you got to get a knife, you got to get the animal, you got to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, one strike from the right to the left, leave the back connected, and let the blood gush out. All of that is what is needed to make the meat halal. But there's one more thing on top of that, that you say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. Imagine I do everything and I say, in the name of Jesus Christ, He is Akbar, wal-'iyadhu billah. Can I eat that meat? Why? It looks the same like halal meat. It smells the same. It tastes the same. Everything is the same. What's missing? Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. So the fact that two things look the same doesn't make them the same. So we're restructuring contracts from debt to investments to make them halal. So what are the options available? Some of you asked for them. I want to go buy a house. That's the next slide. I want to go buy a car. I want to open a business. I want to go to school. I need money so I can go and pay for my medical degree. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options yet. I wish I could tell you that, go to this institution and you can borrow commercially and you can do things on a halal basis. But that doesn't exist. However, two things. And the reason why I give this talk, and Allah is my witness, I fly to ugly places in the world. I go to Winnipeg in the winter for this slide. Because Amam Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I think this slide is what's going to make the tide turn. Two things I want to tell you. Halal meat versus halal borrowing. I was here in the 80s, and Hassan Mustafa actually corrected me. I said, there was no halal meat when we came in the 80s in London, Ontario. What my dad used to do was take me to Ralph. Ali's laughing in the background because maybe his dad took him the same Ralph butcher shop who would slaughter for us, and we'd eat that meat. I said it was kosher meat. I remember it was kosher meat. Hassan said, no, it wasn't kosher meat. Ralph was a Christian. Bighadd al-nazar, it doesn't matter. We would be eating food that wasn't for Muslims, but it was for Jewish people or Christian people that was slaughtered by them because that's what was available. Otherwise, you're not going to be eating anything. But now, and my kids laugh at me, they go, why wouldn't you go to Costco and just pick up the halal meat in Costco? Because we didn't have halal meat in Costco. Now halal meat's everywhere. And I mean like the zabiha meat, our Desi brothers and sisters, God bless them, that would never touch anything except zabiha. I know us Arabs are a bit weird, but they are having the time of their life because it's available everywhere. It wasn't available 20, 30, 40 years ago. Halal borrowing is not available now, but there'll come a time, and it's very soon, inshallah, where it's everywhere. You're going to walk into a bank and they're going to say, sir, do you want the conventional mortgage or the halal mortgage? Ma'am, do you want the credit card that's halal or the credit card that is conventional? It's going to happen. It's going to happen just like halal meat is everywhere, but it requires one thing. There's something that you can do. There's something that you must do. You have to do, which is why I'm here. And that is to tell you that if you don't ask for it, nothing is going to happen. If you don't go out of your way and ask for it, and you're going to go, come on, Khaled, they don't know, they don't care, they will never listen to me. This is how the defeatist mentality has been killing our ummah, versus standing up and saying, what can I do? If I live in Gaza right now, what can I do? Well, I can build a tent, and I can make the tent as good as possible, and maybe rainproof, and maybe put the washroom like 2 feet away from my tent, not 1 foot away from the tent, so the smell doesn't bother me. So you do that. Whatever you can do, you do. And the Prophet ﷺ taught us that if it's about to be Yawm al-Qiyamah, Yawm al-Qiyamah is about to happen, you're witnessing it, and you have a small tree in your hand, just ask yourself, what would you be doing? Seriously. We know how the hadith, many of us know how the hadith ends, and I'll explain it to you. But what do you think you're going to do right now? All of a sudden, this building starts to shake and you think it's Yawm al-Qiyamah. I'd be running, trying to make istighfar. That's the only thing coming to my mind. The Prophet ﷺ said, no, no, no. If you have time to plant it, plant it. Why? Yawm al-Qiyamah, a small tree needs 25 years to grow. What's the point? It's never the point what you do. What you do and what I do is irrelevant, will always be irrelevant. It's the intention and the action of us showing up that Allah will judge everything on. He will judge you based on what did you do with what you've been given. Did this harr Palestine? Yes, no, it's irrelevant. But did you do what you could? Yes, that's what matters. So what could you do in our context? Here's what you need to do, to the extent that you feel inspired to do so. I imagine every single person here, maybe the few children that we have in the room don't have bank accounts, but everybody else has a relationship with a financial institution, either a credit union or a bank or perhaps 2 or 3. So here's your challenge. And as Allah is my witness, I'm putting this on you, that your responsibility once a month, I'm not saying every day you do this, once in a month, that as you're driving home from work or from school or what have you, you stop by your bank. Doesn't have to be your home branch. You go to TD, find any TD, stop, park, get out of your car, line up. I know we don't do that anymore. Everything is electronic. But line up. Just stand in the line and wait until you get to Susie or to John, smile at them, and say the following. Hi, Susie. Hi, John. Nice to meet you. Do you guys have any Sharia-compliant products or services? Do you have any halal solutions? Do you have Islamic mortgages? Whichever way you want to say it, say it. They're going to look at you and say, huh? Excuse me? What? And I know it's going to be awkward. You're going to say, oh, no problem. I just thought to ask. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and walk away. Very awkward. I get it. But you do that. If each one of us does that once a month for the next year, it's January 2025, you do that all the way until December 2025. What do you think is going to happen with Susan and John over lunch or over the morning breakfast as they're having donuts before they open up? They're going to say, these weird, really kind Muslim people, they're always smiling and they keep asking about these halal jigamajigs. Maybe we should look into that. And this is how change happens. You laugh. But as Allah is my witness, I've placed the responsibility on you. If nothing happens in a year, and you did not show up 12 times to your bank to ask for that, don't blame anybody else. Don't blame country X or country Y or, you know, how we always do that. Blame yourself. Say, I didn't take the time to do that. Because I work in the financial institution. What I'm trying to do is from the top down do change, but we need you to do from the bottom up. And this is how change happens. And if you don't believe that that can happen, look at Syria, please. Just anybody here watch the news over the last month, a month ago and where we are now? Huge differences. Why? Allah made it happen, by the way. Allah decided that all the small pieces were just perfect storm for that to happen, something I didn't think would happen in my lifetime. But He knew the people there, they deserved it. For whatever reason, and He gave it to them. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it fruitful for them and to give the same to Ahl Gaza, inshallah. So yes, unfortunately, there's not a lot of options I can give you. There's more on the investment side, which is the next slide. But at least you have a responsibility, and Amam Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I ask you to fulfill it. When it comes to homes, I know this is a big deal for most people. So if you want to buy a home, you've got really 4 ways in Canada in a Sharia compliant way. One is to buy it in cash. Most people will say, I don't have $1 million, so why would you even put that on a slide? Some of us actually have the opportunity to do so. If Allah opened it up for you, if you're a businessman or a physician or a dentist or what have you, it may mean that you may delay your house purchase for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 until you save up enough. But it is possible to save up enough and to buy it in cash. That's completely Sharia compliant. The second way to do it is the concept of إجارة متناقصة. Arabic term, I know it's confusing you, don't worry. It's basically a declining partnership. That's how housing co-ops work. There's a few of them in the country that you can approach. And the way they buy homes is the following. Let's say I go to Nu'man and he has a lot of capital and I only have a little bit. I have $100,000. I need $500,000 to buy a house. He has lots of money. I go, Nu'man, is it possible that I put in the 100, you put in 400, and we buy the house together? So I own 20% of the home. He owns 80% of the home, 40, 400,000, 100,000. And then we buy this home. And what happens is I technically can only live in 20% of the house. And he can live in 80% of the house. But he has his own house. He doesn't need to live with me. He wouldn't want to live with me anyway. So what he does is he goes, fine, you live in all of the house yourself, but you pay me rent on the 80% that you don't own. So let's say rent for that kind of house is, call it $2,000 a month. So fine, I will pay him $1,600 rent, because I'm not paying rent for my 20%. I know my math may be off, but that's fine. But in actuality, what I'm going to do is pay him $2,000, not $1,800 or $1,700. Why am I paying him $2,000? Because every single month I'm buying more and more ownership in the house from him to me. So this is the declining partnership where his portion is declining over time until I buy him completely out. It may take me 20 years to buy him out, but that is completely fine. Remember, this is Sharia compliant because there's no lending. He didn't lend me $400,000. He just entered into a partnership with me and I bought him out over time. So options to do co-ops is Ansar Co-op is one. It's one of the oldest in the country. They started in the, I want to say, 80s, around the 80s, 1980, and they still operate right now, so you can approach them and do that. And there's others. ISNA Housing, I think it's called interest-free financing right now, but if you Google it, you'll find a lot of them. This is also a newer type of contract where it's a vendor take-back. And what that is a murabaha contract. Again, I know Arabic term, forgive me, but really what happens in this case is Nu'man, instead of coming and doing a partnership with me, remember I want a $500,000 house, he goes in and he buys the house for me. So he bought it, and then he says, Khaled, I'm going to sell it back to you for $750,000. Again, making this number up. So he bought the house for $500,000, he sold it to me for $750,000. That would also, and I would pay him, call it $75,000 a year for the next 10 years until I pay him off. So that would be considered Sharia compliant as well. Why? You may say, hold on, isn't that what the bank does? No, no. He doesn't lend me anything. Got to keep that in mind. He bought a house and then he turned around and resold the house to me at an upfront cost, upfront profit. That is completely copacetic in Islam. That would be considered a vendor take-back. And who does this? Like Menzil does this, Iqraz does this. There's a number of providers in the industry that would do this for you on a vendor take-back. The last way, and I know this is a sensitive topic and people usually throw things at me when I mention it, I'm not here to please you. I am here to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is why I need to talk about this. I'm not a proponent of it. I'm not telling you go ahead and do this, but it is an option and it does apply to some people. The European Council of Fatwa and Research, way back in the 90s, issued a fatwa. It's for Europe, but they actually issued it for non-Muslim countries in the West. They said, if you live in a non-Muslim country and you have a need, and you have no means by which you do that, by which you can obtain halal financing, and the house is not for investment purposes, but it's for your own residency, then you are allowed, if you wanted to, if you feel comfortable, to take a conventional mortgage and pay it off as quickly as possible. There are conditions. What I find in my industry, in my experience of 25 years, that most people that take this opinion have not read the fatwa. And it's interesting, many of the people that this fatwa applies to, like it was designed for, the person who has 7 kids and really nobody wants to rent for them, and they don't want to take this fatwa because they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was done for them, but they run away from it. And many other people that it's not designed for them, that they're doing it for investment purposes and they have 6 and 7 and 8 houses this way, they go ahead and take this fatwa. All my advice to you, my brothers and my sisters, is if you want to take this fatwa, please read it. Please read it in quiet. Don't say, Shaykh so-and-so made it halal, made interest halal. Nobody can make interest halal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made interest haram. Even Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam would not make interest halal. He could not, because this is Allah's rulings, not man's rulings. If you're going to consider taking this fatwa, please read it. If you don't have it, I can send it to you in English or in Arabic. Remember, you don't need to convince me of why this applies to you. I don't want to hear from you. I'll send it to you just for your purposes. You're going to need to convince Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you stand in front of Him that this fatwa applies to you. It does apply to certain people, whether you like it or not. I need to say this. It does apply, but it doesn't apply to many others as well. Last portion of my talk, inshallah, within half an hour I'll finish, just so I don't put you to sleep, is the Sharia compliant investment side. There's more options here, so you can walk away with some practical pieces. Remember, in Islam, there's basically unique constraints, unique restrictions that you got to keep in mind. One, no interest. Any investment that gives you interest directly or indirectly is very problematic. That's number one. Number two, remember that ethical component that I talked about? Alcohol, tobacco, gambling, pornography, anything that's addictive, that is vice, would be considered haram. And then there's a third restriction, the other, I call it. So pork defense and cloning. Pork, there's no disagreement amongst our scholars. Pork is completely, universally haram, and you're not allowed to be investing in it. Defense and cloning, depending on the scholars. Some scholars say defense is a problem, others say cloning is a problem. So there's debate here, but there's no debate in pork. I put pork under other restrictions because I have no clue why pork is haram. And I just need to put that out there. I have no clue. Some people say, hold on, especially if you're born in the Middle East, pork is haram because it gives you a disease and you die. And so, not true. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. If that's the case, our Christian brothers and sisters would have died a long time ago because they continue to eat it until today. And some people say it's really disgusting how it's raised. Well, have you seen how chickens are raised right now? If you actually go see it, you'll probably never eat a chicken again. But Allahu A'lam. We don't know why pork is haram. And if you do know, maybe you can tell me afterwards. But I think actually Allah made pork haram just to see what's going to happen. If Allah says pork is haram and we don't know the reason, will we say hadr, yes, O my Lord? Or will we say, well, until I'm convinced why, I'm going to continue eating it? Assalamu alaikum. Wallahu a'lam. I don't know. So I think pork is Allah's way of testing our commitment. طيب. So you may want to take a picture of this. This, on the investment side, one of the most important slides I can put together. I'm proud of myself. Because actually it encapsulates so much. And if you understand this slide, and I'll walk through it with you, you don't need any fancy schmancy person to tell you, oh, you need me to explain Sharia compliance. Here's all you need for Sharia compliance on the investment side. If you understand this slide, and I'll walk you through it, you can, with a little bit of help, probably 90% of any investment question that comes to you, you can answer correctly. I want to say 90, maybe even more. To determine if an investment is halal or not, remember, all investments are halal by default. Remember that. So until we find a problem, we assume it's halal. If you find no problem, then the default is halal. You have to ask yourself 3 questions. Just 3, not 75, 3 questions. The first question you need to ask is, what is the source of return of this investment? Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I have this great investment. It does X, Y, Z. And they start blowing your head up with all the details. Just pause and say, okay, what is the source of that return that I'm being promised? Because an investment is, I'm going to give cash, I'm going to get return. So that return, what's that source of it? How many sources of return there is? Surprisingly, 3 only. On planet Earth, there's 3 sources of return. Obviously, high level, I'm not talking about a specific company, I'm talking classes of return. First is interest. Interest is a type of return. 2, a dividend. I'll explain what a dividend is in a second. 3, a capital gain. So interest, dividends, or capital gains. Those, any type of return you want to think about can fall in one of 3 buckets. Interest is clear. We talked about it ad nauseum. Any type of return that comes through interest, you pause, you say, stop, I found my illah, I'm done, this is haram. But if it's not interest, it could be a dividend or a capital gain. A dividend is when, let's say I have a pizza shop, I'm selling pizzas for a living, and then I made money at the end of the year, and I take a portion of that money that I made, let's say I made $1 million of profit, I take a portion of that million and I give it to my investors. That's what a dividend is defined as. And a capital gain is when I buy something and sell it at a higher price. So if I bought a house at $1 million and 10 years later it's $1.5 million, that $500,000 is what we call a capital gain. So if the return is by interest, you stop, you say, I understand this investment is haram, I can't continue. If the source of return is a dividend or a capital gain, is it halal or haram, the investment? Halal? Anybody else? Sisters? You can't say it's halal. You cannot say it's halal. You have to ask the second question. So it depends. If it's interest is the return, you stop. If it's dividends or capital gain, you have to say, maybe it's halal. I'm not sure yet. So you then ask the second question. The second question is, what is the source of earnings of that business? So, okay, I'm not getting an interest, I'm getting a dividend or a capital gain, but if the underlying business is selling alcohol, tobacco, gambling, can I take that dividend? Completely no. If it's selling potato chips and car parts and computer products, it's okay. So you see the difference? So first, what is the source of return? Second, what is the source of earnings or revenue for that company? So let's assume the source of return is selling computer parts. Would it be halal? No. You still don't know. There's a third question. What is the source of capitalization? So you have to ask question 1, question 2, question 3. Only when it passes all 3 is it Sharia compliant. Because you could have a company that sells computer products, but the source of its capital is all from interest-bearing sources. What is capitalization? Fancy word for basically saying in Arabic, Ra'sul Mal. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is in Urdu. Maybe a couple of you can teach me afterwards. It's basically your capitalization. When I want to open a business and start selling pizza, I need to buy equipment. I need to rent a store. I need to buy the dough and the flour. Where's that money coming from? Well, there's only 2 sources of capitalization, again, on planet Earth. There's 2. It's either debt or investments or equity. Debt is when I go to the bank and borrow money so I can open up my business. Equity is when I go to Muhammad and Nu'man and Sarmad and say, can each of you give me $100,000? And we create this partnership 4 ways. You put in 100 each, I put in my time, each of us take 25%. That would be considered equity, whereas if I go to the bank and pull it from TD, That would be debt. So if it's predominantly, my capitalization predominantly, not exclusively, predominantly from debt, it would be haram. If it's predominantly from equity, it would be halal. What's this word predominantly? This is where scholars disagreed. Mostly they use a third. A third of the capitalization can be from debt for it to still remain Sharia compliant. I may have lost you on that last one, but I'll recap very quickly. You start by saying, what is the source of return? If it's interest, you stop. If it's dividends or capital gains, you ask yourself, what is the source of revenue or earnings? If the source of revenue is haram, you stop. If the source of revenue is halal, you ask the third question on capitalization. If it's predominantly from halal sources, you're good to go. If it's predominantly from the bank, you stop. Okay? Tayyib. You guys have been super patient, and now I'm going to actually wrap up by giving you options. So if you want to invest in Canada in a Sharia compliant way, remember, if you want to borrow, there's not a lot of options. If you want to invest, there are options. You can do it yourself. I'm not going to spend too much time on that given the time that we have. But really, off the shelf or customized is the two things you want to focus on. Doing it yourself is simple, as you run through the three-step process that I told you about, and then determine, are those investments suitable for me or not? Whereas off the shelf is where you buy something pre-made, something that was already made, and we do have options in Canada under mutual funds, exchange-traded funds, and bullion funds. I'll explain this very quickly, and then we'll wrap up. What basically a fund is a pool of investments put together by somebody in a cheap suit downtown Toronto because they understand how to do that, and then they sell it to the masses. That's what a fund is. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of funds out there. The problem with funds have pros and cons. The main con with them is that you don't control what's in it. So that guy in a cheap suit downtown Toronto may be buying alcohol companies, tobacco, gambling, and they don't know about you and they don't care about you, with all due respect. They're just managing money according to a mandate. So that's what makes it problematic from a Sharia compliant perspective. Most recently, there has been a few that came on the market that are stating they are Sharia compliant. We've looked at them, we like their process, and they're offered by regular companies, some Muslim, some non-Muslim. And we looked at their processes, and their processes are decent, so they're worth considering. On the mutual fund side, there's two in Canada. One I unfortunately would not recommend. It's called the Global Iman Fund. I would not be recommending it because they have been in trouble with the regulators. For longer chat, we could do that later. And there's one by McKinsey. McKinsey, recently, very credible company, recently launched a global Sharia fund. Their only issue is they're new. I think they're less than 6 months, maybe a year now. That's the only issue that we see. We'd like to see a lot of track record before we jump in fully. But if you type in McKinsey Halal, it should be the first thing that pops up. That's on the mutual fund side. On the exchange-traded side, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you. If you have questions, ask me later, and I can give you the list if you want. My email is in the corner. You have SP funds. There's like 5 of them, 5 to choose from. SPUS, SPTE, SPRE, SPWO, and SPSK. 5 different ETFs. They're all in the US, but you can access them in Canada on an exchange. So all 5 you can invest in. And there's also the Wahid HLAL is the 6th one that you can invest in. There's one in Canada called Wealthsimple, WSHR. So there's, I want to say, at least 7 right now today that you can get into or perhaps consider and build a portfolio with all 6 or 7, as well as the actively managed the fund. And lastly, the bullion funds. What are bullion funds? I know Muslims and Arabs especially Arabs, maybe Desis as well, I'm not sure, you guys can tell me, love gold. So people are saying, can we buy gold? Yes, you can buy gold. There are funds that would buy gold on your behalf. That way you're not going out and holding a gold bar and putting it under your mattress. What you're doing is you're investing in a fund. You give them money, they go buy the gold on your behalf, and they physically store it, and they charge you for it. You could do that. Now, if you ask me, I would not necessarily think that a big investment in gold is a good idea, but from a Sharia compliant perspective, as long as the fund is actually buying the physical gold and it's not through derivatives contracts, you should be fine, inshallah. And there's a whole bunch of bullion funds that you could look at. Same for silver and same for other commodities. So as a Muslim in Canada, there's a number of things that you have access to, and usually they are advertising themselves as Sharia compliant, and the ones that I've seen in Canada are fine, inshallah, so far. No blow-ups, and I pray that they don't blow up anytime soon. The other option that I'm going to skip for now, given the time, is you get a customized solution, is where you go in and you get a portfolio built for you from the ground up. Remember, with these options up here, they're off the shelf. They're like a frozen dinner. You walk into Walmart and you pick up a frozen dinner. It's not made for you. It's like it's already prepackaged. Comes chicken, potatoes, and carrots. If you don't like carrots, I'm sorry, you're going to get carrots the moment you pull it up. Whereas a customized solution is like walking into Kelsey's or Boston Pizza or whatever restaurant you go to, and you say, listen, I really like this Caesar salad. I know it has bacon bits on it. I don't like bacon bits. Please don't put bacon bits on it, and add extra croutons. They can make it for you exactly the way you want it. And that's another way by which you can access Sharia compliant products in Canada. We don't have time to talk about zakat. Maybe that will be a separate discussion. Here are resources for you to keep in mind. Mufti Taqi Osmani is a foremost expert when it comes to Islamic finance. May Allah give him health and long life. Him and his son actually have a big contribution when it comes to Islamic finance. And he's one of the writers in English, mashallah. So his information is quite accessible. Sheikh Munzir Qahf, my own teacher, Syrian teacher from California. He since went to Qatar and then went to Turkey. And maybe he'll be in Syria soon, inshallah, if things keep moving in the right direction. And lastly, the Islamic Finance Advisory Board. We do have an advisory board in Canada, and that's made up of 3 scholars. They're based in Toronto, and they are there to support the community and scholars with giving fatwa when it comes to Islamic finance. So that was the talk that I wanted to give you guys, and we finished 11 minutes early to give you guys a chance to ask questions. Remember, we talked about Islam and finance, halal financing, halal investments, and resources. Jazakumullah khair. I know this stuff is very dry sometimes. I love it. I could be lecturing on it for the next week because it's so fascinating, especially when you look at the philosophy behind why is it interest haram. I know we didn't touch upon it very much, but as you get into the philosophy, you just step back and say, subhanallah, I just love this deen, and I love my creator for setting up the system so I win, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to profit, wants you to become rich, wants you to become very successful. He just wants you to do it in the way that will not destroy the world in the process. So with that, I thank you very much for your time. If you need to go, I know it's late, feel free and head out. If you have any questions, I'll take your questions as well. Assalamu alaikum. Ya hala. Ya hala. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you for this. Just regarding the house buying or home buying,
Naam.
you indicated the European Council
Naam.
as an option. Will that be applicable if the other 3 could be available, declining ijara or murabaha
Naam.
or cash?
Good question.
If that could be like with less cost for me.
Naam. Very, actually,
with this?
yeah, very good question. And the brother is basically asking, can I actually take the fatwa of conventional mortgage if the other options are available, like ijara and like menzil and so on, the ones that I talked about, or cash for that matter. And technically, no, you wouldn't need it, but realistically, those other options are not readily available or cost effective. So they are available now, but unfortunately, because they're very small, you may at the bank have to pay a 5% rate of interest. The equivalent, they don't charge you interest, the halal options, but the equivalent could be 11 or 12%. So it's very problematic because they're not really the same. Like if there's a halal that's at 5% and a haram that's at 5%, I'd shoot you if you take the haram over the halal. But if one is at 5 that's haram and one halal that is 10, you got to pause and say, I'm running away from the 5% because it's taking advantage of me. How is taking the 10% acceptable? Now, they're not doing it to take advantage of you. It's because they're so small, their cost of capital is very high, and that's why the differential is there. The other issue, and I'll get to you in 1 second, the other issue is even if you wanted to pay the extra price, there could be 50 people in line, and you have to wait 2 years to get it. So that may not be realistic. So currently, from my understanding in the industry, the halal options don't satisfy everybody, so it may still allow for the European Council fatwa, just like we say Islamic schools. Yeah, Islamic schools, there are many, but when you look at all the Muslim kids, they will never fit in Islamic schools. That maybe 5% of the Muslim kids can ever go to Islamic schools. A big proportion of our kids can never even enter the Islamic school, even if they can pay for it. I know you have a follow-up, but you had your hand up. Is it about this?
About the same, I think you should at least try the first.
Yes.
And then if
Yes.
you don't get it, you
Ab-
settle with the fatwa. But
Absolutely.
without it, because as you said, if we just go for the 12, like the 5,
No.
then the 12, nobody will go the 12, and it will stay 12,
12 or 15, absolutely. So the brother said a beautiful thing, which I thought goes without saying, but it's worth reminding you, that you absolutely want to try your best. Allah will ask you, what did you do? And if you said, Ya Rab, I tried, and I called, and they said, I got to wait 3 years, and I really have a need to go now, okay, that's a justification. But if you just simply say, yeah, they won't work for me, I'm just going to take the interest-based one, you're going to have to justify it in front of Allah. Tfaddal.
Actually, another question. Thank you. You indicated for the public to, urge the banks or
Naam,
financial institutions regarding
naam,
thinking about Sharia
naam.
financing. So we have a lot of imam communities in Canada, or representatives, or even through our MPs here. It will be a faster track actually to ask through them to urge implementation of Sharia in the financial institutions. Is there efforts regarding this?
So politically speaking, and I think somebody made that question or that request initially, I believe, just being humble student of the industry, that it's never government that moves. Government doesn't provide the solution. It's the commercial entities that will provide you the solution. The government can come out and say, we should have halal mortgages. It doesn't matter. The bank is privately owned. It's wildly owned, like you could own the bank, but the bank works based on these firms, financial firms, work based on their stakeholders and their shareholders. It doesn't matter what Mr. Trudeau thinks. If they don't believe they can make money in it, they're not going to offer it. Obviously, it helps when the government says, we think this is an area where commercial entities should consider. That's a positive. They could change the regulation to make it less onerous from a tax perspective. That could help. But ultimately, the needle moves when the commercial entities start to move. When they want to make something happen, you'll find government right in step to allow them to make it happen. Wallahu a'lam, that's my opinion.
Just quick comment here. I did not mean it like through the constitution itself only, but our representatives as Muslim community. Could they approach the banks with this
طبعا
request or
طبعا
something?
yeah
Any
oh
request
okay Yeah, absolutely. So the more we can approach the banks with, I think what you're saying, one voice, maybe have an imam council that sit there with 50,000 Muslim signatures that can, yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. That makes sense. Whichever way we want to get our voices heard, that's on us. We need to find the way to do that. The more voices heard, the better. Absolutely. Ala.
Question about the investment options.
No.
So I understand that the options that you presented are pretty much off-the-shelf stuff, whether it's mutual funds, investments, and I don't know how much you dive into or what you dive into when you talk about custom solutions.
No.
But when I think investments, and you know when 90% of the population invests in the stock market and in the mutual funds, they're not really benefiting our community, our
No.
Muslim community.
No.
I don't know if you've given that much thought, or perhaps some of us have certain money that
No.
we're interested in investing,
No.
but they don't want to give it to the Coca-Colas of the world,
No.
and to the McDonald's of the world,
No.
these mutual funds.
No.
What would be your advice to a Muslim gathering like this,
No.
where perhaps the primary or secondary goal from investing would be to benefit somehow either our own community or perhaps stay away from
No.
multinationals?
No, absolutely. So yes, with a caveat that typically when I think of an investor, I think of, the teacher or the hardworking individual, the 9-to-5-er, the person who is trying to build a nest egg to ensure that they can retire or put their kids to school and so on and so forth. Those individuals don't have the capacity to take risk. They don't, because like whatever comes in goes out. There's a small portion. That portion's put away for the next 10 years so my kid can go to school. A person like that, I feel, wallahu a'lam, is steady Eddie, wants for something that is slow and steady that will get them there. Unfortunately, the way to get steady Eddie is the big companies that we all love and hate, that have a love-hate relationship with them, especially after I know what's happening given last year. That situation complicates it a bit more. But that is the easiest way for them to invest. What you're talking about is what I think is long overdue, is where Muslims who have the capacity and have the brain power and have the ability to take risks, to come together and move the needle. Absolutely. Our situation as an ummah will not change if we're playing it steady Eddie. It won't. Unfortunately, it won't. We need to drastically change based on the genocide that's happening. And a genocide doesn't happen once every few years. Inshallah, it'll never happen again, but it did happen and you don't want it to go to waste. So I call on people like you and others in the room that are not playing to their potential. They think they're at an 8 out of 10, but they're actually 2 out of 10, and they need to step back and say, how do I really take my brain power and take risk that can move the needle? That may mean, for some of us, quit our jobs and create entities where we not diversify the risk, but concentrate the risk, and if it works, we double and triple and quadruple our net worth, and create institutions that we like. Create the multinationals, the next Amazons ourselves, and make sure that they operate according to our value system. That's not for everybody, Ala-ad-Din. I think that it's not fair to expect many people who are 9-to-5ers just getting by to support these initiatives, because those initiatives, a lot of them will fail. And if they fail, they break these people. Maybe you're strong and you can rebound, but many of them, they're ruined. And that's not fair for them. So it's not an answer I can give you and say, yeah, let's go all create the next Amazons of the world. Some of us need to. And people like Muhammad Ashur and others and Tariq Ansari are doing that. So the question is, why aren't we doing that like them? And I love Muhammad, and Muhammad should be here talking to you, not me. But you need to ask yourself, like Muhammad could do it, I could do it. Like, why not? Tariq could do it, why can't you do it? It's only because we're limiting ourselves. That's how I see it. Wallahu alam. You had a question, sir. And sisters, I'm not seeing you, so you're next, inshallah.
Regarding conventional mortgages through the banking system, how can they become Sharia compliant if they're based on riba, their income, the money that they bring in?
Naam.
So for TD to come out with a halal Sharia compliant mortgage,
Naam.
I don't understand how that could work towards us when the income that they make as a whole is risk.
Naam, beautiful. So there's two, and this is debated among scholars. The simple way is their source of capital is irrelevant to you. What's relevant to you is the contract you have with TD. And I understand there's two opinions on this. What do I mean? If TD says, listen, what's your name, sir? Muhammad. Muhammad, I'm TD, and you want to buy a house. I'll go buy the house for $1 million, sell it to you for 1.2, and you have a contract with me to pay me back 1.2 over 20 years. I'm TD, I'm Khaled Sultan, I'm whatever. All you care about is the contract that you have with me. If that contract is halal, you're done.
But if the money is not.
Irrelevant.
Really?
Completely. Now, I'm telling you there is a debate among scholars. I'll get to it in 1 second. But money in and of itself is not halal or haram. Al-mal laysa halal wa haram lidatihi, as our scholars teach us. It's not inherently halal or haram. It depends on how you've obtained it. If I steal money, that money's haram. But if I come to you and you're selling potatoes, and I say, here's $10, thank you for your potatoes, that money that was haram to me came to you, but it's halal to you because you sold potatoes to me in a halal contract. So money is not like pork. Pork is haram li dhatihi. Pork, it doesn't matter how you cook it and stew it and barbecue it, it's inherently haram. No matter how you, except if you're dying in the desert, I'm not talking about that. So the general opinion is that you only worry about the contract that you have. And by the way, I'm not making this up. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, did you know it was haram for him to consume sadaqah? It's haram. Any one of us, if we needed to, if we're quite poor, we could take sadaqah from anybody else. If I lose my job, if I lose my savings, I need to feed my family. I'm going to put my hand out and I expect you guys, give me $1,000, I need to feed my family. That would be fine. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not allowed to do that. Special rules only for him. One day, there was a dessert that was prepared for him, and he sat down and he was about to consume it. Aisha rushes in, his wife, and says, Ya Rasulullah, don't touch it. He goes, why? She goes, because that was gifted to you by a person. The person who gifted to you got it from sadaqah money. Somebody gave her sadaqah. She used the money to make a dessert and gave it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Aisha said, please don't consume it. He goes, no, no, ya Aisha. For her, it was sadaqah. For me, it's a gift. So the same money could change. So that's why the one opinion says it doesn't matter. And that's the opinion that I take, especially if it's a TD or a RBC or a BMO, because we know their money it's a ribawi bank. It's not a halal bank. There is one opinion in our scholars that say, yeah, but by you taking that halal mortgage, you're facilitating the haram to happen in the background, hence you're still responsible for it. I get it, but in a non-Muslim world, I can't function this way. In a non-Muslim world, I'm constantly allowing haram to happen. When I go and buy apples, like I give money to the person who's selling me apples, I know he's going to take it because he's non-Muslim, and I'm going to facilitate him buying alcohol and drinking at home. I know I'm doing that because he drinks. I know he drinks, and I shopped at his shop. He made a profit, but I can't live if I'm making that limitation. So maybe in an Islamic context, Islamic country, I need to be very, very wary who I make business with. And that's why I just came back from the Middle East 2 weeks ago. There, the muqata'a is on everything. I would go and try to buy gifts for my kids, like chocolate bars, or the candy they have no gelatin in it. They go, you can't buy this and you can't buy this and that's haram. I'm like, What's this brand? I don't even know what this brand is. They go, yeah, this brand is not Arabic, hence we boycott everything. There, they boycott anybody who is non-local. And it makes sense for them, because to them, the West and America is a problem. I can't do that here. I can't live here if I'm boycotting anything in the West, because that means my taxes are going to the West, my employment, my everything. So it depends on where you happen to be. Long-winded answer, but I think I can't wait till TD offers a Sharia compliant mortgage. The sister had a question, forgive me. Tfaddali. No. 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 طيب, Allah jazeek khair. That can keep me busy for the next hour. Very quickly, I will mention that the principle is, the starting point is any lending contract with interest is problematic, whether you're paying it or receiving it, period. I can't change the rules. It's not a popularity contest. I don't want you guys to like me or hate me. Here's the principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put. I must follow it as everybody else here. But there's exceptions, and especially in the West. Why? Because if you took the course Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya with Sheikh Adnan, you'll realize that our fiqh is so dynamic. You can't simply say, here's the rule, ukhbut rasak bil hayt, I don't care, this is the one rule and I'll die on this sword. No, Islam has principles and has qawa'id that when they're removed, the hukum changes temporarily. So when there's mashaqqa, Islam is not here to make your life difficult. It wasn't intended to. But when it makes your life very difficult, there's dispensation. وَالْمَشَقَّةُ تُزَالُ, and there's difficulties, it's removed temporarily. So you asked about OSAP. OSAP is when I don't have money to go to school and I need to borrow. What do? I can simply say, don't go to school. I could say that. Go work at McDonald's. Our scholars don't look at it this way. And by the way, I'm not giving you a fatwa about OSAP, please. Sheikh Adnan can. I can't give you any fatwa of anything. I'm just getting your mind to think. If all of us right now go and work at McDonald's, and we're already weak, we don't have Islamic finance as a community. Fast forward 50 years from now, we're all McDonald's workers because we didn't go to school. Do you think we'll have Islamic finance in 50 years? Do you think like we're becoming weaker and weaker? So that's why scholars say pause. I need to respect the no interest, that's clear. But I also understand that you live in a place and you didn't choose to be here. You're here because you're forced to be here. You'd rather be somewhere else, but you couldn't. And you came in an area where it doesn't give you what you would have had in an Islamic country. So what dispensation can we give you as a community temporarily? And that's why they allowed for home mortgages. They allowed for this as a temporary dispensation. OSAP, the beauty behind OSAP is a portion of it is grants that can be forgiven. I think that's how it works. I never had OSAP, but I think that's how it works. Plus interest does not accumulate until you're done. So what most people can do, and I've seen it happen, is work and take OSAP at the same time. Work in the summer, work at nights, work in whatever, and then pay off the portion that's not forgiven as quickly as possible. And inshallah, Allah will forgive us. Yes, you're getting into a contract that's ribawi, but with the full intention that you're going to pay it off as quickly as you can. And had you had the option, you would never have taken it. But you don't have the option. And education is almost a darura now, almost. That you can't really function as a Muslim community without being properly educated. Am I giving you a fatwa for OSAP? Absolutely not. Ask the person who sits here and get his opinion. But to me, الموضوع كتير أوسع from interest versus non-interest for education. You asked about homes, similar approach. You asked about investments. Investments, there are options that are Sharia compliant. I mentioned a few of them. If you have a specific question, ask me afterwards and I can get you a list. And I think that's all the questions you asked. RRSPs, thank you. RRSPs are a savings account. See, I told you guys you're going to be here till Fajr. Registered Retirement Savings Plan. It's a beautiful program. It's not halal or haram. An RRSP is like this cup. If I tell you, can I drink what's in here? Is it halal for me to drink what's in the cup? You can't really answer until you know what's in the cup. It's water. So yes, of course I can drink it. But if there was alcohol, I can't drink it. So an RRSP is like the cup. It's the container. In and of itself, it's not halal or haram. It's the type of investment that you put in it. RRSPs can come in with a haram investment or a halal investment. I highly, highly recommend everybody who can open up an RRSP if you're in the US 401k and put halal things in it. Same with RESPs and tax-free savings account. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to benefit everybody because we were talking about OSAP.
No.
So OSAP, because I was just facing the same thing. So OSAP is debt that's split between federal and provincial.
No.
So on the federal side, which is the bigger portion of the debt, there is no interest federally. On the provincial side, there is. So one trick I found when I was paying off my OSAP is you can pay off your provincial portion before it starts accumulating interest.
Boom.
And it's a trick that they don't tell you about. So if you're paying off OSAP, if you want to know more, just talk to me.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Beautiful. Yes, sir.
I had a very specific question about the Musharaka contract.
No.
Like some of the offerings at our institutions, specifically Munzil. So as I understand, like it's not just the interest that makes a certain like contract haram. It can also be like, you know, how like risk is divided between like the shared parties. And so in the case of Munzil, for example, like let's say like they buy like 80% of the property and you get 20%. However, how it works is that they still like let's say like you want to make changes to the contract, you want to refinance earlier, or you want to go with a different institution. They make you pay like a penalty for like that is worth like 3 months of the payment or something like that. And I know there's like difference of opinion in that, but a lot of scholars say that any sort of penalty that doesn't apply like equally to both the partners makes that contract haram. But I've seen that happen at all the halal financial institutions. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Jazakallah khair. Remind me your name?
Abdul Majid.
So I cannot speak to the specifics of the companies because I don't represent any of them and I don't know the details of their contracts. What I can tell you is EMJA, because I've been involved in this. EMJA is the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, Salah Hassawi and others, are actually looking at the Canadian providers of Sharia compliant lending contracts, and they're giving them a grade, and that's happening as we speak. We're on, like I've been pulled into some of those discussions. So I think over the next few months, you're gonna get an opinion from a body of Muslims, scholars, that say this is halal, this is questionable, this is problematic. When it comes down to the contract, the devil's in the detail. You're right. If we're structuring a contract as a partnership, but everything is on you and I have no risk, and you're paying the property taxes and you're paying the maintenance and I'm guaranteed my money back, it begins to look like a pig with lipsticks that's being sold as something else. That would be problematic, absolutely. But that's something that can be fixed. And I think those companies need to know that these small terms need to be adjusted for the contract to become more Sharia compliant. I can't speak to the specifics, but yes, thank you for bringing that up. Keep an eye out over the next few months for an independent third-party opinion and a stamp on them, inshallah. Yes, sir. Alaykum salam.
You mentioned in the earlier slides, like the comparison between quality and quantity of trade.
Naam.
So with the quality ones, you mentioned how the example of the dates,
Naam.
how you can trade, like you cannot trade low quality dates
Naam.
for a better one, for example.
Naam.
Why is this not like permissible if both parties are like agree to it?
I love the philosophy questions. I wish I had 6 hours, but I'll answer this. For me to fully answer it, I need to step back and talk about it from a philosophical perspective, which I don't have time, but I do have time to say the following. The brother is asking, why is it a problem with Nawab and I'm saying, listen, I have excess dates of low grade, you have the higher dates. We'll trade as long as we agree. Agreement of both sides is not what makes things halal. I can agree with a certain sister to have a relationship outside of marriage. She's okay with it, I'm okay with it. That doesn't make it halal, unfortunately. What makes it halal is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows to be halal. I think, although the Prophet ﷺ didn't say these words specifically, but studying it the way I did, I think the Prophet ﷺ wants to remove the lack of price discovery. What do I mean by that? Like, if I want to trade 2 pounds of certain dates to 1 pound of certain dates, that type of transaction, is that more volume-wise, the number of people that want to do this type of transaction, is that more or less than the number of people who just want to sell 2 pounds of dates in the open market? Which one is more likely to happen? Exactly. Like, to find a person that wants to trade me and Nawab, I don't know, once in 6 months we'll get that happening, but people selling dates in the market is happening every single day. Every single day people are buying and selling dates. Every single day. Price discovery is almost certain. What do we mean by price discovery? Many buyers, many sellers, you quickly discover what the price is, nobody gets tricked. But when we're doing this trade, I may be more affluent than Nawab, and I say, no, actually, your grade is not that great, you should settle for 1.4 pounds, not 2 pounds for one. And I may take advantage of him. So to remove the possibility that I could take advantage of him or him take advantage of me, he introduces many buyers, many sellers. The only way to do that is to go to the open market. Because the open market, cash for anything can be traded. That's what markets are. That's what Amazon is. So I hope that kind of clarifies it. Now, the Prophet ﷺ didn't explain the way I just explained it to you, but that's my understanding of why it's done. Allahu Alam. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your presentation and your time. But I have a question on like 0% agreements where like you want to purchase something and they say it's 0%
No.
interest.
No.
And you can pay it off for the next year.
Like a car. Yeah.
Like a car, like furniture, like
Yep.
whatever it is.
Yep.
A lot of times I'm always thinking like, what's the catch?
No.
And you go in and you dig and you find like $150 application fee or
No.
some kind of fee that they slap on.
No.
And I'm aware that that's something that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for the long-term financing.
No.
So my question is, would that be considered riba? And then a two-part question to that is a follow-up to 0% APR like credit cards,
No.
where you can do a balance transfer and you don't pay interest, but there's just like a $300 fee because you
No. No. Perfect. So remember, I've armed you with a way to think about it, to ask yourself, is there excess on a lending contract? The moment there is, we got to stop and pause. Now you bring out the concept of a fee for a contract to lend me money. And this is where it becomes a little bit gray, because the fee is typically not proportional. Like whether you're borrowing $10,000 worth of furniture or $500 worth of furniture, for them to sit there and write this contract for you, there's a processing fee of 100 or whatever the number is. So it's not dependent on the debt that's being written. That's why it becomes a little bit murky. And you could justify that actually, yeah, they have to do an extra step. They hired this person, they sit there and they spend whatever amount of money putting it into the system. That may be to compensate the contract creation. I can buy that, no problem. Specifically, if it's divorced from the amount of the debt itself. Now, why would they do that? Not for the processing fee. They're doing that to push product out. I'm a furniture company, I'm not a financing company. I want to sell bedrooms and bedroom sets. So I recognize that if I do a 0%, I'm likely to push more volume, hence my turnover is high, hence my profit is high. That's why they're doing it. Now, they're unlikely to give you a discount if you go this way. If you say, listen, I'll pay you in a year, you're going to pay the sticker price, maybe just whatever, 2% off of the sticker price. But if you pay in cash, oh, you get the 15% discount. And that's also okay. That's completely fine. البيع الآجل, يعني when you're paying over installments, is naturally going to be higher than spot price. And even in Islam, that's considered okay because there's no lending. So now when we get into the credit card transfer and so, it's the same thing to me. If there is a delayed payment and there's a fee charged for processing and it's disassociated from the amount, I'm more comfortable with it. If it becomes a percentage of the amount, stop. Like, that's like an interest rate clearly in a different form. Mahmoud had a question.
When you talk about Islamic finance, and you said that there are restructured contracts.
No.
And are there examples of?
Yeah. So basically, buying a home, for example, when this doesn't happen currently, like TD doesn't, Muhammad was saying, what if TD did it? I hope TD actually moves in that direction, where I'll give you an example. Mahmoud, myself, and Tariq. So Tariq is the bank. I own a house. You want the house from me. The house is worth 500,000. Option one is you go borrow from Tariq 500,000, and then you pay me 500,000. I give you the house, and you pay Tariq over like 5% over the life of the mortgage. That would be haram. Period. Can't. Why? Unless there's an exception, and so on and so forth. So what do? What Tariq does is to make it halal, is to say, okay, I'm going to buy the house from Khaled, and I'm going to go sell it to Mahmoud. He buys it from me for 500. He gives me 500. I give him the house. He then turns around, gives you the house, and you give him 700,000 over time. So he just restructured the contract from a debt contract between you and him to a sale contract between you and him. And you may say, well, I paid him extra anyway over 20 years. Isn't it the same thing? No, because in the first instance, you paid him 200,000 more on debt. In the second instance, you paid him $200,000 more on a sale contract. And that's how it's restructuring it. Does that make sense?
It just came to my mind that with the second one, there should be a contract that I will pay from him once he buys it.
Yeah.
Because maybe, for example, I changed my mind and I didn't want to buy it anymore after he buys it.
Yeah, there will be a contract to secure him, but it can't be in the same contract. That would be haram. If the same contract, he's buying it from me with the expectation that you're buying it from him in the same contract, it's not allowed. But there's two separate contracts. They're based on each other. Like he's not buying the house for himself. He's buying it with the expectation that you're going to buy it. That's allowed, but it has to be two separate contracts. He signs one with me, and then he turns around and signs one with you. And it's a condition that he takes the house in his possession. The house must transfer in his name. If it doesn't, if it comes directly between us, it would be haram. Does that make sense? Now we're getting into the details. Yes, sir.
It's about the capital investment.
Yeah.
So now when it's a loan, without like even if we're not asking about the source of capital of the people who's giving us.
Naam, صحيح.
If he's giving us a dividend, then we need
صحيح.
to ask about that capital.
Beautiful question. Remind me your name, sir. Salim. Abu Ish. Abu Ghassan. Ahlan wa sahlan. Beautiful question, actually. He basically said, hold on a second. You said if I'm going to go to TD and get a house, I don't really care about their source of capital. But all of a sudden, if I'm investing in IBM, I need to care about the source of capitalization. Yes, because when you're investing in IBM, you are an owner of IBM. You are responsible partly for what IBM does. You're not a partner in IBM. Nobody calls you up from IBM and say, Abu Ghassan, we want to buy a company in China and we need to borrow money from the bank. Are you okay with it? No. A partner, if you actually were a partner, you and I are a partner in a business, I need your input, I need your approval. In IBM, you're a silent partner. That's why they say you're partially responsible for what IBM does. Why partially? Partially means, well, we'll tolerate a bit of the haram, up to a third from the haram. Because we recognize it's not your veto. You don't have a veto saying, I don't want this to happen. But that doesn't mean that, oh, we could go ahead and sell alcohol, tobacco, and gambling and you're not responsible, because you could always pull out of the investment. That's why they came up with that third ratio. Very good question. Ali. Actually, do you mind pausing, because the sister has a question? Unless it's about this one.
It is.
Okay, go ahead. It's okay. She gave you the floor.
Okay. So just with respect to capitalization changes over time, right? From debt to equity, et cetera, in many micro and macro businesses. So,
No.
and if someone customizes their investment portfolio under an RRSP or 401k, like this, are there lists that track these, and do they change from a third eligibility?
No. 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 So yes, you would technically need to do this test at least 4 times a year, at least. Why 4 times a year? Because they publish their reports for at least 4 times a year.
Move it on the quarter?
Potentially. If right now it's the ratios are okay, but they go and buy another company, they get a whole bunch of debt to buy a Chinese company, it tips you over, you got to get out of that. Now, there's some dispensation at how quickly you get in, how much you give them time to rectify. There's a whole science behind it and a bit of art. And that's why I normally advise, if something is close, punt it. Like, don't even get into it. Because you're going to have to get in, oh, this quarter I'm offside, this quarter I'm back on side. It's just going to be a headache. But yeah, technically you would need to keep that in mind. Yes, sister.
So I'm not too sure if this falls under your forte, but they recently rolled out halal life insurance
No.
in the States. And I was wondering what that justification is, like what makes it halal, as well as how far are maybe Canada into this and things like that.
No. Beautiful questions, guys. I hope you don't mind. Please leave if you need to leave. I'm enjoying this. So I don't feel bad if there's only one person left in the room, but I can't simply say I don't have time, because that's a great question. Life insurance is actually debated in Islam in principle. Is it halal or haram? And yes, there's a big body of scholars that say life insurance principally is haram. How can you insure life? Life is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's completely haram. I take the other opinion. The opinion, it's not my opinion. I'm not a scholar. I don't meet that standard, nor do I ever want to speak on my own. The scholars, like Mustafa Zarqa and others, who looked at it from an income protection, not a life insurance perspective. What do I mean by that? What's life insurance? I say, okay, let's say I'm about to be 50. I think I'm going to work 10 years. Let's say I earn $100,000 a year. For 10 years, I'm expecting to bring into my family $1 million. And let's say I get hit by a bus. That $1 million is going to go to educate my kids and pay off their weddings and so on. So I go and buy a contract with an insurance company. I pay them a premium, and they say, listen, if you die between the next 10 years, you're going to get $1 million. So what have I done in this case? I've secured my income. There's income expectation of $1 million to come in, but if I get hit by a bus, the family's out $1 million. So it becomes income insurance, not life insurance. But we don't call it income insurance, we call it life insurance. Mustafa Zarqa has mentioned, Sheikh Mustafa Zarqa, Allah yarhamu, talked about this extensively, and he agreed with it in principle. And if you look at it this way, it becomes no different than car insurance or fire insurance. You're paying a premium for a bad event that happens. If it happens, you get coverage. And the example they used, by the way, is let's say we live at the time just after the Prophet ﷺ. And let's say I'm weak, I'm not strong, I have my family, I have my young kids, I'm old, I need to migrate from Medina to Mecca, and I know that there are many qutta' turuq, there are many bandits along the way. And if a bandit comes through, I'm done, because they're going to take all my money and take all my kids and my wife. I can't defend myself. So I go to Ali. Ali is a big muscle guy. I say, Ali, can you come with us? And I'll hire you and your protection for me. We're going to go from Medina to Mecca. And if anything happens, you pull out your sword and you fight even to the death. He agrees, I agree, 10 gold coins. And then he walks along with me and we go from Medina to Mecca. And we arrive in Mecca and nothing happens. Zero, nothing. How much do I own? 10? He didn't do anything.
That's the agreement before.
Yeah, agreement, but he didn't give me anything. He didn't.
He walked with you.
He was going to walk anyway. I'll make it easier for you. He was walking anyway. He was in that direction. Do I owe him anything, Dareen? Why? Yeah, that's the agreement, but he didn't provide anything.
If he didn't say, if he put it like it's contingent to having an incident.
Yeah,
that was that?
Yeah, it was.
Contingent to having an incident,
Of
then
course.
you don't owe him.
He gave you the peace of mind.
He actually gave me something, guys. He gave me something. It was contingent, but he gave me the service of protection against the bad event. The bad event didn't happen, but the protection was always there. I didn't see it, but it was always there. That's why I absolutely owe him 10 gold coins. And that's how he justified this concept of life insurance. So getting back to your question, I actually think life insurance on a temporary side, there's two types of contract, permanent and temporary. Temporary side is acceptable because in that case, what you're doing is you're paying premium, you're getting coverage. If you don't die in the 10 years, you get zero, nothing from the company. And I feel that that's the closest. That's like car insurance. You could be driving your car for 40 years, not have one accident, and you say, look, I paid so much money in premium. Yeah, but you had so many years of coverage. You didn't notice it, but it was always there ready for you should something happen.
It is like haram, but because it's imposed by the law, then you
Life insurance is not imposed.
not about
Yeah, car insurance and so on. Until you go to Saudi, which I was there 2 weeks ago, and it's all over the place, and that's how life functions. So I actually am open to it. Now, permanent life insurance could be very problematic. And lastly, whatever's happening in the US eventually filters its way here. So if it's there already, like I don't know what you mean by halal insurance, like it could be a company that's just telling you what I just said with an Arabic name, but it's still conventional at the end of the day. But if it is something like takaful based, it's probably coming here eventually. Does that answer the question? Okay, yes sir.
Going back to the brother's question on like personal responsibility in terms of checking stock and like
Yeah.
Where is it moving? Would it be safe to say that do we still have that personal responsibility for mostly investing in the ETFs that are Sharia compliant and have been put together and sold to us in a way that they are
No.
halal to us?
No. I take the opinion that yes, because you look at their methodology and their methodology is sound and they're credible. Now, technically, you'll never know. Just like if I'm selling you halal meat, you'll never know. Like, how do you know? I'm just saying it's my word. I have the stamp. It's halal meat. But you never, ever 100% know. And you, about anything in life, by the way. If you 100% want to know everything in life, you will not live. You will just sit there running fact checks on everything. So as long as the methodology is sound and the company is credible and it's not obvious that they're just using it to sell, tawakkal Allah and don't look back. Ali, Muhammad, sorry.
You said that the effective interest and then the quality. Does that apply to currency exchange?
Oh, you guys are amazing. You know, half of the presentations about currency exchange, cryptocurrency, day trading, I didn't talk about any of that because that'll take a long time. I'll tell you the following. Currency exchange is very, like Forex, I think trading, is very, very close to gambling. Sorry if that's what you do or anybody here does. And I would need an hour, seriously, I would need an hour to walk you through why. But currency exchange, no, doesn't have ratios. It's because you're changing a Canadian dollar for a US dollar or a Japanese yen for pound sterling. So it doesn't have these ratios. But the type of activity, I'm not saying changing currency is haram. I'm saying trading currencies back and forth for profit begins to look very, very close to gambling. And I'm talking about a person in the industry who's been doing it 25 years, and I would never, never dream of doing what I see people doing. And look at the, signal to buy, signal to sell. I would never do that with all my experience because that is very problematic. Sorry. Yeah, that's completely fine because you have an underlying need. I went to Saudi, I needed Saudi riyal, so I took Canadian dollars and exchanged it so I can pay for my cab and go to the airport. That's completely fine. It's not done for trading or investment purposes. It's done to functionally, and that's completely fine. Yes, sir.
If you're selling a product and the product is not something that somebody can typically come and just pay for it fully, so there's always financing associated with that product, you're not the one extending the financing, but filling up the paperwork for whichever bank in institution is going to extend the financing. Does that put you in a position that you're doing something haram? Because ultimately, the buyer is taking a loan from a bank to pay you for your product, but it's an interest-based loan, and you're helping,
You're facilitating.
facilitating the transaction.
Yeah, so it becomes something that is uncomfortable, yes. Yes, I don't want to tell you haram, but yes, you're coming very close to the line where it's murky, to the point where you're facilitating debt, you're originating debt is what the term we use. You're saying, I'm not involved, I'm selling a car or a house or what have you. So could you find a way where you don't facilitate? You're like, I need this payment. Anybody can make that payment, but I'm not involved in writing the contract or putting in the application for debt. That would be the perfect solution. Now, maybe your situation, the industry doesn't function that way. If I put that limitation on you, you stop working and you shut down and you're homeless. You need to ask him of, well, in my situation, what should I do? But in general, the moment you start facilitating debt, it's like you made it happen and it seems problematic. Wallahu a'lam. But he would be the person to tell you the details, inshallah. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Can somebody get the door, please? Thank you.
So we were just talking about capitalization and having predominant halal capitalization, but what about source of revenue? So for example, if a company does
Good question.
10% of its business in
Good
Haram,
question.
is that the same thing?
beautiful question. So the scholars have placed a threshold. If you're a company selling two things, halal and haram, let's say I make pop and I sell alcohol. What percentage of alcohol would taint the whole thing? They placed it at 5%. So they'll tolerate up to 5% of haram revenue before it tips the whole thing into haram.
So, for example, Costco is selling pork and alcohol, but predominantly it's not pork and alcohol, then that would qualify.
No, no. So Costco doesn't sell alcohol to my knowledge, but they do sell pork. They do now. Yeah. So, but you'll notice the good thing is it's such a small percentage. Like even when you look at it, you pass by, oh my God, they're selling alcohol. You look at all what they're selling, it's everything else. Like Walmart, same thing. It ends up being a very small portion. And that's why you would still need to purify it. So if you're investing in Walmart, let's say, and 3% of all their sales are from alcohol, you would give away 3% of your profit every single year.